The crying never woke the village all at once. It moved slowly, house by house, room by room, heart by heart. At first, people thought it was the wind. In a village surrounded by old trees and narrow dirt roads, strange sounds were not unusual. Wood expanded at night. Roofs groaned. Windows rattled when the cold crept in. But this sound was different. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't sudden. It lingered. Soft, broken sobs that felt human. The first person to truly hear it was Mrs. Elkins. She had lived in the village for 62 years and slept lightly ever since her husband passed away. On that night, she woke at exactly 12:17 a.m., the digital clock glowing faint red beside her bed. She listened. At first, she thought she was dreaming. Then, she heard it again. A woman crying. Not screaming, not calling for help, just crying the way someone does when they believe no one is listening. Mrs. Elkins sat up slowly. The sound came from outside, from the direction of the old road, from the direction of Barbara's house. Barbara. Everyone knew Barbara. Old woman Barbara with long white hair, soft hands, and eyes that always looked tired but kind. She had lived alone at the edge of the village for decades. She waved to everyone, spoke kindly, never stayed long in conversation. And she had died 3 years ago. Mrs. Elkins remembered the funeral clearly. The closed casket, the quiet rain, the way the village gathered, uncomfortable but respectful. Dead people don't cry. Mrs. Elkins pulled the blanket tighter around herself. The crying continued. By morning, she convinced herself it meant nothing. Grief played tricks on memory. Loneliness invented sounds. She told no one. That was her mistake. The second night, the crying returned. This time, louder, closer. It woke Mr. Holloway across the road. Then the Jenkins couple 2 houses down. By the third night, half the village had heard it. And everyone noticed the same thing. The crying was never in the same place twice. Some nights it came from Barbara's old house. The windows dark, the door still locked, the yard untouched. Other nights it drifted along the road, slow and deliberate, as if walking. And on the fourth night, someone heard it inside their own home. That someone was Daniel Price. He was 12 years old and had not yet learned fear the way adults had. Daniel woke to the sound coming from his hallway. Soft sobbing, careful, controlled crying, like someone trying not to be heard. He thought it was his mother. "Mom?" he whispered. The crying stopped. That scared him more than if it had continued. Daniel sat up. The hallway was empty, dark, but cold in a way it hadn't been before. The next morning, Daniel told his parents. They laughed it off. That night, the crying moved again. By the end of the week, no one in the village slept well. People began leaving lights on, locking doors earlier, avoiding eye contact, because everyone was thinking the same thing, and no one wanted to say it out loud. Barbara was crying. Old woman Barbara had not always lived alone. When she first arrived in the village, she was young enough to laugh loudly and strong enough to carry groceries without help. Her husband had come with her, a quiet man. They stayed 5 years. Then one day he left for town and never came back. No accident, no body, no explanation. Barbara stayed. She always stayed. People began to remember things they had ignored. How Barbara never let anyone inside her house, how she locked her door before sunset, how once, years ago, she told a neighbor, "If you hear me cry at night, don't follow it." At the time, everyone laughed. Now, no one did. On the 7th night, Daniel followed the sound. He didn't tell anyone. He waited until the crying began, soft, distant, familiar. It came from the cemetery, the small one at the edge of the village. Daniel grabbed a flashlight and slipped outside. The night was colder than it should have been. Too quiet. No insects, no wind, just the crying, leading him forward. Barbara's grave sat near the old oak tree. The dirt looked wrong. Not dug up, pressed, as if something beneath had been pushing upward and failed. The crying stopped. Daniel's flashlight flickered. He ran. That night, the crying changed. It was no longer sad. It was angry. And someone else disappeared. The morning after Daniel ran from the cemetery, the village felt different. Not louder, not darker, smaller. As if the air itself had pulled inward. People stepped outside cautiously, scanning the road before committing to a full breath. Conversations were shorter, voices lower. Everyone kept glancing toward the cemetery without realizing they were doing it. And one thing was certain now. The crying was no longer just a sound. It was a presence. Daniel did not go to school that day. He sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped tightly around a mug he hadn't touched. His parents argued quietly in the other room, thinking he couldn't hear them. "He's just scared," his mother said. "He saw something," his father replied. Daniel stared at the floor. He hadn't seen anything. That was the worst part. By noon, the rumors had already changed. People said Barbara's grave had been disturbed. People said someone had heard breathing near the headstone. People said the crying had spoken words. None of that was true. Not yet. The crying returned the next night at exactly 12:17 a.m. Every clock in the village seemed to agree on the time. This time it didn't drift. It stayed outside the cemetery gate. Louder than before, more deliberate, as if whoever or whatever was crying wanted to be found. 3 men went together. They told themselves it was the only sensible thing to do. No flashlights shaking in frightened hands, no whispered prayers, just men with coats pulled tight and faces set with forced confidence. They reached the gate and stopped. The crying came from inside, from Barbara's grave. One of the men gagged, another stepped back. The third, Mr. Calloway, forced himself forward. The dirt was no longer pressed down, it was cracked. Thin lines ran across the surface, like stress fractures in drying clay. Mr. Calloway knelt. The crying stopped, immediately. Silence rushed in to replace it, so sudden it made his ears ring. "Barbara?" he said quietly, unsure why he said it at all. Something shifted beneath the soil. Not upward, sideways. The men ran. By morning, half the village knew. By afternoon, the other half pretended not to. And by evening, everyone locked their doors. Old woman Barbara had once been the village's quiet constant. She brought soup to sick neighbors, she watched children when parents were late, she remembered birthdays no one else did. But there was something else about her. Something people only admitted to themselves now. She always listened, more than she spoke. And sometimes when she listened, her face changed, as if she were hearing something no one else could. 3 years ago, Barbara died in her sleep. That was the official story, but no one had been there when it happened. No doctor, no family, no witness. Only Mr. Harlan, the man who buried her. Mr. Harlan had lived next door to Barbara for over 20 years. He was the one she trusted with her spare key, the one who checked on her when she didn't open her curtains, the one who found her body. He never spoke much about that morning, just said she looked peaceful, just said she was cold, just said he'd handled everything. That night, the crying stopped everywhere else and began outside Mr. Harlan's house. It started softly, almost politely. Mr. Harlan sat in his chair, staring at the door, his hands trembling so badly he had to grip the armrests. "I did what you asked," he whispered. The crying grew louder, closer. The sound slid under the door like smoke. Mr. Harlan hadn't meant to rush the burial, but Barbara was afraid. She had told him things, near the end, things she claimed she heard at night, voices beneath the floor, voices calling her name. She made him promise. "If something happens to me," she said, gripping his wrist, "don't wait. Don't let them keep me." He didn't ask who they were. He didn't want to know. The crying outside his door changed. It stopped sounding sad. It started sounding tired, exhausted, like someone who had been asking for help for far too long. Mr. Harlan opened the door. The crying stopped. The night air rushed in, cold and sharp. The porch was empty, but the footprints were there. Bare feet, leading away, toward the cemetery. The next morning, Mr. Harlan was gone, his bed untouched, his door wide open. The village searched. No one said his name out loud. They didn't need to. Barbara's grave was open. The coffin lid lay beside it, splintered. Inside, nothing. No body, no cloth, no sign of struggle. Just one handprint pressed into the lining from the inside. That night, the village slept for the first time in weeks. No crying, no whispers, no footsteps, just silence. But silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means something has finally finished what it started. The village woke up to a silence that felt unfamiliar. Not peaceful. Unfinished. People stepped outside cautiously, expecting to hear the crying again, half hoping and half dreading it would return. But the air was still. Birds sang as if nothing had happened. The road looked the same. The houses stood where they always had. Only the cemetery felt wrong. The gate stood open. The earth around Barbara's grave was dark and fresh, like a wound that had not yet closed. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Everyone understood the same truth at the same time. The crying had not been grief. It had been a request. Old woman Barbara had never wanted to leave. That much became clear as memories began to surface, small moments people had ignored for years. How she lingered in conversation as if afraid of silence. How she watched people walk away instead of turning back inside. How she once said, very quietly, "I don't like being alone at night." They remembered her kindness now, and it hurt. Daniel was the first to say what no one else would. "She didn't want to scare us," he said, his voice shaking. "She wanted us to listen." The adults exchanged glances. They wanted to tell him he was wrong, but they couldn't, because they had all felt it. The crying had never chased them. It had waited. That night, the crying returned, but only once, and only to those who were awake. It didn't come from the road. It didn't come from the cemetery. It came from everywhere at once. Soft, distant, layered with something new. Relief. People stepped outside, not running, not hiding, listening. The crying lasted less than a minute. Then it changed. A breath, a sigh, and finally, silence. The kind that settles gently instead of pressing down. At dawn, Daniel walked to the cemetery with his father. The grave was still open, but something new rested inside. Not a body, a shawl. Barbara's. Folded neatly, as if someone had placed it there with care. They closed the grave that morning, this time properly, this time together. No one rushed, no one spoke, and when it was done, something shifted. The village felt lighter. Weeks passed. No more crying, no more footsteps, no whispers in hallways. Life resumed slowly, carefully, like someone testing ice after a long winter. But not everything returned to normal. Some things never do. People began leaving lights on for neighbors, stopping to talk longer, listening more, and every so often, late at night, someone would pause because they thought they heard something. Not crying, breathing. Soft, satisfied. Daniel dreamed of Barbara once. She stood at the edge of the village, her white hair moving gently in a breeze he couldn't feel. She smiled at him. Not sadly, not frighteningly, just finished. She said, "Thank you." And then she turned and walked away. No one ever heard the crying again. But sometimes, when the night is very quiet, people swear they hear footsteps, not coming closer, but leaving. Finally.